Hello again folks, and I hope you agree with me, this is a beautiful looking creation. Why? Because it's the blue and gold of the 1930s, 1934 to about 1940. Of course then the war got in the way and there wasn't much in the way of Meccano. This is from around about a 1936-7 number 6 outfit that I bought and I've reviewed of quite a long time ago now. It was a renovated set, quite well done in some ways, not in others. The gold is done very well. The blue and gold doesn't seem to have been touched really, apart from a bit of a clean up. Most of it's reasonably well used, some of it's good, none of it's particularly bad. The worst one is probably the flexible plate here, but I'll come on to that in a bit. The sad thing was though that firstly, even though the set had been put together very well and utilised some more recent parts painted in the older colours, which I ain't really got a problem with that, I got it for a good price. The effort put into the set and restringing it to the card in the boxes, and I think a little bit of renovation on the box. There were about 3 main parts missing, which is a bit of you think, well, why did you go to all that effort? One of the parts missing was a 12.5 inch strip. That's one of these, and I think there was a 5-hole strip missing and a 7 if I remember rightly. Now this isn't exactly as the instructions show you, mainly because even with all the parts you cannot build it as per the instructions. For a start, although there was one 5-hole strip missing, even with that in place, or replaced I should say, there isn't enough in the set. I've made a few alterations. Firstly, the instructions suggest using a clockwork motor. I've used an electric motor with a bit of a gear reduction, and as you can see it's a bit too fast still. And I've had to make some alterations purely to get the set model built as close to the instructions as possible in some ways, and in other ways I've gone away from that, but still kept the overall appearance more or less of the original instructions and the design. There are niggles, oh yes there is. For a start, the instructions, as per anything of the 30s and before, you get some text, you got a fair amount with this one, and 1 or 2 line draw, well, a bit better than line drawing to be honest, 1 or 2 images. That said, because of that, in some ways this feels like your own imagination that's built it, at least in part, or a bit more than in part. So there is a certain satisfaction from that. Now you probably think, well, normally with a newer set, especially the new sets, I wouldn't say that. And I wouldn't, because I suppose certainly with the newer stuff I'll try and look at it more so from the beginner's point of view. A newbie who hasn't touched Meccano, never even heard of Meccano. But I don't only look at it that way. It's quite difficult to do so, but I try and look at it from all roads, if you like. Now with that out of the way, there are some little things you have to do that I'm not really happy with. Like for example, here we've got a 7-hole strip, I think it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6-hole strip, sorry, there. Therefore, at least at one end I've been able to use 2 bolts to secure the strip, which is more structurally sound. In other areas, at the other side, this side, there's only 1 each end, because there's a 5-hole strip there. Now that ain't so much of a problem here, because we've got this semicircular plate making the structure totally more sound. As you can see from the colours, those of you that know this period, I should have brass plated bolts, or maybe even brass bolts, I don't know. They're zinc, which Just to reiterate this from some of the Facebook and I think the Meccano Zone forum posts and replies. I know some of you are a little bit upset, if you like, and perhaps a bit stronger word, but a little bit. There were a few comments where they're like, I shouldn't have dug into the set, but it wasn't all it seemed. So anyway, even though I would have probably dug into a set if it was original completely, I haven't really lost anything with this set because it's not a complete set, as I found out. And yes, okay, the nuts and bolts are fine and you can use them, but they're not of the correct period. So it's not a pristine set by any means, and it has been repainted. So the value is pretty minimal, really. There are some cosmetic changes, but I think, because it's quite awkward to put this thing on video, because of its reasonably large size, let's have a look in a bit closer. Right, let's start at the front left corner. These are the steps to get to the ride and the little pay booth. We'll start with the pay booth and the flexible plate here, 3L by 11L or 1.5 inch by 5.5 inch. Now this one had obviously been used before. Now you won't be able to see, I don't think, from that angle, but across here it is well creased, the paint has gone, and with not too much effort you could, well, essentially tear that in half. So first up, I used this one for this severe bend because it was the worst plate, but I realised that if I just tried to bend it by just bending it in my hands, or fixing it one side and bending it over, which is another way of doing it, odds on that was going to split. So as you can see, I've put bolts in the top with washers just to support it, and it's bent fine, and as long as you're careful with it, it should be fine for some more use. However, a couple more straightens out, it's probably going to split itself. So what I would say to you, in any of your builds, unless you have really restricted for parts, if you do have to bend a plate or any part, leave it bent unless you really have to straighten it out. Because if you continue to bend and straighten, they're going to break. And okay, you can get plenty of other parts even now, but you can't just get them on the high street, really. So perhaps keep that part for possible future use. The steps here, as you can see, I suppose you could argue are quite ornate. Now these, as if you couldn't guess, are modern 3L narrow strips with quite a few narrow angled brackets. The beauty of recent sets and the sets over the last couple of years, some of the more useful narrow parts you're getting a lot more of, such as these narrow angled brackets. A little bit fiddly to do once they start sandwiching each other, and there's been a lot more washers used as well at the top, because I didn't want to unnecessarily, not really bend, but warp any of these strips that I've got, although they'll probably repaint it, quite nicely done. So just to give a bit more longevity to the parts, basically I've added a few more washers. It looks better. This should have been stringed, just sort of zigzagged along, and one of the things I suppose doesn't appeal, because I suppose it's quite expensive for what it is. Original cord can be quite expensive. I think I've seen like one hank of cord, which I think is about 8 feet long, probably about £8, and there was like a cardboard rack of them of about 4, I think they come in, 4 wrappings, and you're looking at £40. Now, as I've said with this set, I don't mind digging in, but some things I wouldn't use if I've got to do that sort of thing with, and especially as I've got plenty of modern string, more modern cord I should say. Of course you could use string, more modern cord, which to be honest I find a bit more usable because it's softer, it tends to grip better. Now, as I said, this model you can't build as shown. Let's have a look at some of them things that you can't build as shown. Now here's 2 of the chairs of the ride, and for a start there isn't enough 5L strips such as here, and as you can see here, there's not enough. As I said before, there was one missing anyway, but even adding that, there's not enough. I've got some fairly rough but usable blue and gold stuff. Some of the gold is pretty horrendous in the paint finish, but it was quite a lot and for a reasonable price, and I have found a lot of use for a lot of the bits. So it can all help, even though it perhaps doesn't look as pretty as it might. Now, one of the issues with the chairs, mainly these, and there's basically two of each that are the same, is that where they wanted it pivoting in relation to where these 5L strips were, you would find that it was hanging down like that. So much so that as it came round at the base, it clattered into the base. No good there. So I suppose ideally they should be level, but that's better than being hanging down that way. What was very awkward was fitting the U-shaped preformed flexible plates at the back and getting at the nut of what I deem to be the 1-bolt fixing. You don't really need anything else at the back. Should have used washers, but I think actually, if I recall right, all the washers I've used were in the box. Hence why you won't see a washer on the back there. If I was making it again, I would have used washers everywhere I could to help protect parts. There's several places where there's slotted holes. I haven't used washers. I think there was only a few washers in the set, if any now. The trouble is I've lost my notes, so it doesn't help really, even though it's hard to read. That one's moved a bit. Again, to do with balance, can you see here with this 7L strip there? Now it did show you it fixed at the end there, the pivot, but again no balance, so to balance it up more or less I've moved it down one. Ideally 6L strips for this side would have been better, but there isn't enough of those in the set. What else have I tweaked? Let me see. Oh yes, the collars that hold the chairs on. There's only 4 in the set, and there's very much of an angle here because you're using the sector plate, which is virtually a cut-off triangle with its point cut off. Those strips are angled in. Let's give you a better look at that. So there you can see those 5-hole strips are somewhat angled in, and yes, now I recall now I did use a lot more washers that was in the set, if there were any at all, just to take the slack up. Some of this was utilising spring clips, and I wouldn't normally have changed the model so soon in the build. I'd try and build it as the instructions state, but you could, well, probably about halfway through I realised that couldn't be done, so I added more of these anyway. And what I've done with these, because of the slight angle there and there, with the washers, you look at a washer and it's slightly domed, just very slightly. So I've done it so the dome, all these, the domes are facing the chair strips in, and hopefully allowing a little bit of the curve there. And it's fairly secure on there. It doesn't flop around much, but there is a bit of play. But those was an awful clatter when they went round when they was in the original design. Another thing I don't like is, it's a case of having to really, when you fit these on the end, these are one of the things you really haven't got a clue about how they went on. So I've just overlapped them so these don't bend, these trunnions, these flat trunnions don't bend. But the double bent strips that hold it on down in there does curve a little bit to meet the angle of the sector plate. So I don't suppose we use sector plates that often, but when you do, you can see some of the problems you have. Now the main pivot, this required some working out and playing around. I tried a few ways, and this is another bit where at first I tried what it showed you in the instructions, the spring clips. No way was it going to work. So in the end it's a bit of a Well, they certainly utilise the parts in the set, a lot of the parts in the set for this model. So we've got a bush wheel here, 3-inch pulley there, 3-inch pulley on the outside, that is the drive pulley, final drive. And we utilise wheels here. Now one of those isn't particularly smooth running round, but does the job. And I've used lots of extra washers in this area. Probably, I don't know, best part of 20 washers I would say in all. The reason being, first up, there certainly isn't enough washers to do all the things I've done with the build extra, and here it doesn't mention any washers inside, just here. I hope you can see that there. Now if you didn't have any washers there and using the bolt straight through with no form of spacer inside, okay, maybe you could have done it with nuts, but it would have buckled these strips in there and there. Wouldn't be very good at all. So we've got extra washers there. We've also got extra washers on the other side where the bush wheel is, here, and that's to clear the boss securing part of the boss, which is a little bit more raised than the face of the bush wheel. That's a common sort of thing, that is, really. Otherwise again you'd kink these strips. Now without all these little structural little efforts, these tweaks, this would be very floppy. But in my routing for parts, and parts still left in the set that not apparently used, I came across these double bent strips. A little bit too wide certainly, but again extra washers inside between the strip and the end of the double bent strip there. And there's only two, so I didn't put any more on. I probably have got a couple of spare in rather scabby gold, but it's fine really now. Added extra collars. One of the other things that was wrong in the set was the axles that were included. There were supposed to be so many of the 4-inch and so many of the 3.5-inch and whatever, but the number of them were completely wrong. Whether that was a mistake originally or the set hadn't been remade up correctly, I don't know. So I've had to add some, or rather correct the parts list. There's probably enough axles but not enough of the right length, or not for this model anyway, so I've had to do that. And I think that's about it for the alterations. We'll have a look down below now. There you can see the top of what is a hinged plate, and funnily enough I've got one to hand. In fact I've got loads of these to hand in different colours. Someone else fell on the floor. And basically you pull the pin out of the hinge. You see there you got the rings at the top. It does actually tell you to remove that. The other side is used at the other end of the model. And here is one of those hinge plates, which I happen to have to hand. I've got quite a few. Picked up quite a load of Meccano from the North Yorkshire Moors Railway at their, oh let me get it right, is it Gromont or Goathland? Gromont, where the shed is. You walk through the tunnel. You walk through a tunnel alongside the main tunnel up to the shed shop and have a look there, see what they've got. And on this occasion they've got quite a lot of stuff, nothing really rare. It would have come to about I think it was about, I think it was 256 quid. There was a lot of wheels and tyres. 1930s period stuff. Some of it have been repainted. This is obviously 1930s, as you can see by the blue and gold, a little bit worn. Some better. Some were in packets. In fact, I've got another one here actually in a packet. Or is it two? It's two. There. They've all been packaged quite nicely. None of it mega mint, but decent. And I offered them 150 quid and they said yeah, because it's been here for years. I have been in since and they have odd bits, so worth a look. And it's usually more or less behind the sales counter itself, the main counter, or just to the left. You can pick up bits there. There were some other sets but not complete. But going back to the model, There you can see the pin there, and just by, on the model, prodding this end with the spanner, one jaw of the spanner, there was enough to grip this end, but this one is pretty stiff. I was lucky. See, one of my things is, with a Meccano set, it has to be built with the tools provided. Now, how do you get that out if that's stiff? You need a pair of pliers. Well, they ain't provided, are they? And now you've probably got them, or maybe a pair of tweezers will do. There you can see the other end, and that's a little bit more structurally secure than the first end I've showed you. This is because it holds the axle for the drive, which would have been a crank angle. Now, talking of the drive, this is it. Of course, as I said, it was a crank angle originally, and it come out there. It's already marked the paint, but it was okay. But yeah, let's make the full use of this model. Let's put a motor in it. Could have used a clockwork motor. I have got one, a number 1 from the 70s, which would have done. A magic motor would have done, to be honest. For their size, well, they ain't far off the power of a bigger motor, certainly the ones I've got, but they don't last as long. So here I've done a bit of mix of old and new, or newish. The motor is a 3-stroke 6-volt Meccano motor, and that's probably a couple of years old, from the 25 model off-road truck set, I think it was. I built the lorry out of that set. We've got, probably from the same set, this box section here, almost box section. We've got it on a period plate though, from my stash of slightly rough stuff. Sort of mid-30s blue and gold 5 elbow 7-hole or 2.5 inch by 3.5 inch flange plate, held together with modern Allen bolts and strips, spacers, washers, etc. There is some reduction, which is, oh blimey, we've got a worm driving a 19 tooth pinion, so that's 19 to 1. 1/2 inch pulley to a 3 inch pulley, so that's 3 to 1. Is that right? 3 to 1? Come on folks, help me. 1/2 inch to 6 to 1. So we've got 25 to 1 all in here, running off 2 1.5 volt batteries, and it's a bit quick, as you've probably already seen. Now I've tried it with one battery in the battery box and a axle taking up or making the connection on the other side, and it's a bit too much for it to drive. It does start sometimes, and certainly is a better speed. So here you can see the end of the motor construction. The structure is quite sound like this. Of course these are zinc, as you can see, and are added extra parts. The beauty of this is it does add a little bit more strength to the end here, which even now has a little flex in there, because there's nothing along the bottom of there in the original instructions. There's nothing left to go across the bottom there, so it's a little bit flexible and easy to damage, of course, being a flexible plate. Those two there overlapping, those two 5-hole by 11 holes, 5.5 inch by 2.5 inch flexible plates. So from a longevity of parts, if you like, that helps quite a bit. No other way to do it, folks, really. I've had to pull it over so you can see. So there you are, simple worm and a pinion onto the axle. I've used a triaxle there, I think just because that was to hand. Quite free running though, you tend to get a bit more play with the triaxle. The whole setup is not very quiet, as you've probably already found that out. It's quite skeletal really, and quite amplifying this model. End of that is the 1/2 inch pulley, you can just see there at the top of the picture, and then of course up to the 3 inch pulley. So the battery box I'm using is a little bit temperamental. The first one I picked up, I tried it, worked, but it's got a bit of a dodgy switch. Well, let's try it. Get your fingers out the way. There you go. Just use some light oil on that, that's all. And of course that 1/2 inch pulley is connected to the 3 inch pulley by using Meccano cord. Modern Meccano cord, I've got quite a few of that, a few hanks as they call it of that, different lengths. The most difficult thing was tying the knot on your own when you got nobody to put your finger on the knot, their finger on the knot, so that was a bit awkward, got there in the end. One thing I did do, I stretched the string cord before I used it. Always stretch your cord before using it, because what you may find is that it will stretch in use and therefore doesn't grip. So always stretch your cord first. But quite a simple mechanism really, far too fast. Good if you like your rides to be fun and scary, I suppose. You'll probably get thrown out of it. But it will be steam driven at some point, and therefore I'll have a little bit more control